Are we ready to obey our masters? That's what this is about. I told everybody that I would do life on earth and then obey our masters. I said probably controllers, but today is the 2nd of January, 2022. And my name is Eric. Eric's Eye Opener is the name of my YouTube channel. So, all right, it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them that they've been fooled. That's very difficult, right? I mentioned this word in part one, and it really wasn't part one, it was the past video. Indelible. When the government brainwashes people, they create an indelible mark, a very deep impression. And that's because they utilize, of course, our emotion, right? That split between the intellect and the emotion. And so, yes, those who were seen dancing were thought to be mad by those who simply could not hear the music. All right? So it's not just hearing, but it's also seeing. Plato said it's easy to forgive a child for being afraid of the dark, but it's much more difficult to forgive an adult for being afraid of the light. And that's what's going on, guys. It's fear. All of this is imprinted in us. And Aldous Huxley mentioned in an interview with Mike Wallace in 1958 that they would potentially incorporate additives into our food, air, and water, which they have, but then they would utilize a lot of different other methods. And you see what's going on with Ukraine and Russia. This is just what happens when powerful people who control minds of others pit people against each other. They manufacture a scenario, a situation where, of course, Putin was baited into attacking. But he really had no choice. This was the time. It was a time of his choosing in many ways. And again, this is not it has nothing to do with right or wrong. It has to do with, I respect the Ukrainians. I respect the Russians. I don't want people to die on either side, but all of these wars are architected in a pursuit of global hegemony. So, nobody wants to think that they've been fooled or that their mind is controlled. I'm there with everyone. Everyone has their mind controlled to some extent. I mentioned something before. We hear something over and over again, and we tend to believe it. There are many things at my age. I'm 61 years old. And at my age, there are many things that I come across. I shouldn't say many, but it happens every so often that something that I thought was true all my life was not true. I had just heard it a number of times. I don't even remember what the sources were, but that's, especially when I was young, you didn't have this access to the internet. And even then, you can't depend on anything. People know you can't depend on Wikipedia. What I've always said, and I brought up Lucius Cassius, who was a consul in ancient Rome. He lived from 151 BC to 107 BC, and he predicated the outcome of his cases as a judge on who he thought stood to gain. Lenin said this during the revolution in 1917. If you want to know who's guilty, look for who stands to gain, basically. Lucius Cassius, look for who stands to profit, I think is what he said. But then again, who knows what he said back in 151? Well, he was born in 151 BC, but who knows what he said in that time period, right? We know that we had somebody called Juvenal, also from ancient Rome. There were a lot of very intelligent people in every society and every civilization. And Juvenal was a satirical poet, really a writer. And, near the 1st century AD, he coined a phrase called bread and circuses. All of this drama, all of this that we see in the political forum is simply an illusion. It's a mirage, right? As he said, they took the attention of the citizenry, and we're talking about the ruling class, as always, took the attention of the citizenry off the important political issues in the political forum into the games in the arena, the chariot races and things like this. It's always been done. The masses have always been controlled. And now we're in an area of high technology. I've mentioned it before. We've reached this tech age, and our masters don't need us anymore. They've always utilized the small group of people, has always utilized the masses to obtain whatever goals they were after, right? They've learned, and again, I went back to, let's do it real quick. Let's go back to the clay tablets that were found in Samaria. talking about usury systems, right? Usury systems basically referring to compound interest rather than just typical interest rates. Trapping people in debt peonage, okay? They were doing this that long ago. We know that Jesus, of course, turned the tables over and threw a fit, when he came into the temple and found the money changers taking advantage of people. So this went from Samaria into Babylonia. Hammurabi was king from 1792 to 1750. There are records from him utilizing something like compound interest rates. This would be handed off to the Greeks and the Romans, of course, would offshoot into the Byzantines. I've told this whole story. I do a chronology. But this is a way that the masses have always been controlled by a few bloodlines, a few families, and so they did that. And when they traveled to Byzantium, and it was the Greeks settled Byzantium in 657. There's really no, and that was BC. There's really no records before that of Byzantium, and Byzantium, of course, would become Constantinople and later Istanbul. And it's really important to note. Of course, it was Diocletian in 284 that saw Rome was beginning to fragment. He sent half of Rome off to Byzantium, and he appointed Maximian co-emperor in 286, who he would later become emperor, and then it was actually Constantine that in 330 traveled to Byzantium. Constantine was in power from 306 to 337. So this was an incredible time. The money that was made here, guys, we can't even imagine. It's such a beautiful place too. But really the crossroads of the world, the heart of the world, right? All of this trade ran from Asia into Africa and Europe. This was the spot, and that's why, Russia, what happened to them with the Sykes-Picot Agreement was so important. But trade from Russia, you would run it through the Black Sea, past Istanbul, which is the Bosphorus Straits, would run past Istanbul into the Sea of Mara Mara, and then from the Sea of Mara Mara you would take the Dardanelles into the Aegean, and the Aegean empties up into the Mediterranean. All of these waterways, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Danube, the Nile, the Dnieper, which runs through, Ukraine, right? And that's where, who was it? It was Potemkin, Gregory Potemkin, who took Catherine the Great down the river in his boat and showed him this great town and city that he had. But it was all fake. It was simply facades of buildings, right? And that's why we would really want to refer to what we have now as democracy as a Potemkin democracy. It's not real. None of this is real. There's no freedom. Most people don't even realize we don't have a constitution anymore. It was enforced to some degree, and it still can be. But in essence, if they want to circumvent the Constitution, the people that are in power can do it anytime. People in Washington, like the neocons, they don't need to have any kind of a court case for anyone. We know that we now don't have the Fifth, Sixth, and Seventh Amendments, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment. Due process no longer exists. This is just like what they do internationally. They throw out all these allegations and then they just attack. No proof, nothing. They just make up the allegations. And that's what they can do with any citizen right now. And so that's why it's a very fearful thing to tell people the truth, right? Fortunately for me, I don't have a big platform. You saw people like Martin Luther King, who exited the earth on April 4th of 1968, Malcolm X on February 21st of 1965, and Fred Hampton shot to death in his bed. All of these by intelligence agencies, right? He was shot to death in his bed on December 4th of 1969. We saw Bobby Kennedy, we saw Jack Kennedy or John Kennedy, whatever you want to call him. This is what happens, and that's why we have this thing called conspiracy theory. If anybody's read a book on Bobby Kennedy and what happened at the Ambassador Hotel, it's fascinating. But the stories were corroborated by personnel, front desk personnel, and employees that worked there. The girl in the polka dot, whatever it was, a girl in polka dot dress. And so, all this stuff is set up. It's designed by people who control everything. So I guess the point here is, we got into Byzantine. They made all this money off of trade, right? They had these usury plans, and I just want to remind everybody that wars have been architected. Look, Native Americans had wars. And there's always been somebody behind this. And the same thing is true with people like Sargon the Great and Peter the Great and Cyrus the Great and Alexander the Great and William Wallace and of course Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, most people don't realize, but I talked about Rome going into, what would later become Istanbul. Of course, Constantinople, the name would last, but the Byzantine Empire would fall in 1453. The name would last until 1930, until Istanbul gained prominence. But what you have to understand is they made money, they controlled people, they controlled the wars. There was an alliance between the Byzantines and the Mongols. Most people don't know that the Mongol Empire was the greatest empire in history by far. It's said that you could fit 5 Roman empires inside the Mongol Empire by territory, right? And of course, Genghis' son was very powerful. Genghis died in 1227. And, the way we understand textbook history in 1263, there was a Mongol-Byzantine alliance. And of course, this was an alliance to take over the world. This has always been a pursuit of expansionism, right? Of course, that's what we accuse Putin of. Putin's not expanding, he's just the opposite. He's given up so much. But try to tell even a historian. Most historians don't have, and this is really the problem, guys. There are 3 primary outlets for propaganda. Academia is as big as it gets, right? At the advent of Oxford, right? Oxford was founded in 1096 and Cambridge in 1209. These institutions were designed to control the narrative, to control the people and their belief systems. As George Santayana said, history is just a pack of lies about events that never happened as they were told by people who weren't there, okay? And even Tolstoy said it very, very well. History would be a wonderful thing if only it were true. Yeah, well, there goes my phone. We're just going to let that go. But anyway, guys, so yeah, history, that always throws me off, and I forget to take these things off the hook sometimes. But, all right, so let's talk a little bit about, of course, somebody brought up to me once, I was at a speaking engagement, and they brought up, well, look, there was no currency inside the Mongol Empire. No, they didn't need currency. What they had is traders and merchants, right? And all of these people, they did the equivalent of what the Fed does now and what the banks do. They gave Genghis Khan and his armies, they gave them really 0% interest rates. Sound familiar? And really no taxes, right? They were exempt from taxes. So this is how all of this works. And so, these are all, the conquest has been continuous. And the bloodlines that have controlled people have been around for thousands of years. Don't forget, as I said, this goes back to clay tablets, right, in Mesopotamia and in Samaria. So, all right, so let's see what I am doing here for time. So I've still got pretty much time left. So we have to talk about the role of all this, right? The Bank of England was founded in 1694, and this would really establish a lot of control there. A lot of the wars were run out of the Bank of England. We have to remember that the Rothschild banking dynasty actually controlled and financed both sides in the Napoleonic Wars, and this was really terrible for Russia. If you think about Napoleon's attack, and he advanced from the same direction in 1812, and the same thing with Kaiser Wilhelm in 1914, Russia has been used to being attacked. I mean, it's a huge landmass. It's the largest country in the world, and it is now, we know, the richest in resources for the most part. And so, if people can't, it's amazing to me that people aren't able to figure out the patterns. I remember back in 2013 when I was on Facebook. I still have a Facebook. I can't even access it. I lost my information. But I remember these people I knew, because I did work at Trader Joe's at that time. All these people that were posting horrible things about, who was it? It was Bashar al-Assad. The torturer and killer and freak job and whatever. Now, his father, Hafez, was pretty nasty, but not really. All of this is about understanding context, right? Hafez had struck a deal with Reagan, and Reagan said that he would protect the Lebanese and the Palestinians, and of course, tens of thousands were slaughtered in 1982, and that's when Hafez took the advice of someone, I forgot who that was, but started to implement this kind of suicide bombing thing, right? And of course now it's synonymous with Middle Eastern terrorism, right? They're suicide bombers. Well, I mean, this is something that's obviously been going on since we had bombs, right? So the idea here is, and a lot of things happen. I mean, I don't want to go through the history. There's a great documentary out there by Adam Curtis, and I can't remember what it's called, hypernormalism, and it tells you quite a bit about this area and the bombings that went on, the Lockerbie, Scotland thing, how they blamed things on Muammar Gaddafi that weren't necessarily his fault. Even there was a dispute between Europe and this was for the suicide bombings in Paris and Rome at the airports. There was a dispute that Europe said that there was no evidence that Muammar Gaddafi had anything to do with this, if I'm remembering that right. So, all right, guys. So we want to move up here. There's so much I could tell you about secret societies and all of these things, all of these areas that they control, whether it be the Jesuits, the Donme, or the Druids. The Donme, very powerful. This is a Turkic word, let's not get into that. I'm going to go straight up to the founding of the Federal Reserve, because these are the bloodlines. These are the people, right? And on December 23rd of 1913, that Federal Reserve Act was signed between somebody named Paul Warburg and Woodrow Wilson. And of course, many historians consider Woodrow Wilson to be the worst president in history. I'm laughing because we have these consensus of, look, I have respect for academics. These specialists that hold these PhDs, these doctorates, they know more than me in one given area, but they don't understand anything because they're trained that this is what they're going to think, right? It's very linear. And once you understand this, you can figure out that you yourself have to put the puzzle together, right? So what happened here, and again, it doesn't take much thinking to understand that each successive president is the worst president in U.S. history. This is math. This is physics. There's nothing complicated about it, right? Warren Harding had all these personal, terrible things. He seemed to be a person of very poor ethical and moral values. So what? This had nothing to do. Look, as the country grows, and this is, I'm going to explain how the Federal Reserve intervened and made changes here. But as it grows, okay, it expands. And as it expands, corruption expands. More money is made, right? You generate more capital. And this whole process, there's just more corruption to be facilitated, right? By this, we'll call him a Potemkin leader, right? These are just puppets, as people say, these presidents. And so, I mean, this is common sense. But so, in a way, this is what they've also mastered. They're not lying when these consensus of historians, they're not exactly lying, because they're leaving something out. They're not telling you they were the worst president of their time. And that's how it works. All right, guys, so let's take a look at the time once again. I don't know how much of this I'm going to be able to get into, but we're talking about the signing of the Federal Reserve. These are these people. They lost the war to the Ottomans, right, who were the Arabs, the agrarians, who really took the empire from them, the Byzantine Empire. They were generating all this money through trade and usury systems, and they became very, very wealthy. And, again, this is just fascinating when you think about it. I talked about the tributaries and, how they utilized trade and how the trade would go back and forth utilizing the great rivers. And so, all right, so they signed the Federal Reserve Act, and 6 months and 5 days later, and remember, Paul Warburg told us, he said, we will have a one world government, whether you like it or not. It's just a question of how it will be arrived at, either by consent or by conquest, okay? Obviously by both. And he understood this. The consent here is the brainwashing of the people. We'll go back to Aldous Huxley and this potential incorporation of additives into our food, air, and water. All of the repeating, the teaching, and I didn't give you, now I remember, I only gave you academia, but media, academia, and politicians are the three primary outlets for It's weird how your mind just remembers. I didn't give them the third one because there's so many things to talk about. But those are the three primary outlets. The media convinces you of things. Think about Hollywood being a part of the media, right? Zero Dark 30, American Sniper, Black Hawk Down. Oh, the glory of war, right? Blowing people to pieces and putting through PTSD, things that you could not possibly comprehend unless you're there. And I say that I try hard to comprehend it. I wasn't there. Chris Hedges was. He was the bureau chief for the LA Times, and he was on the front lines in many places and many conflicts. So I give him a lot of credit for that. I have my disagreements with Chris and other people, but I look at people like this. I wouldn't be what I am without people like Noam Chomsky and Chris Hedges and Glenn Greenwald. These people, they're the glue that put me together, right? I mean, not just them, everything I've done in my life, but they're still big figures. And so we have to understand that, whenever somebody gets too big a head, they think they know too much. We always have to remember that everyone is our superior and that we may learn from them, right? And so I'm going to move on with what happened with the Federal Reserve in the next video because I've hit 21 minutes. And if I start to tell the story, I'm liable to get carried away and go to 30 or 40 minutes. So let's hold it at this. People don't have that long of an attention span. So this is obey your masters or obey your controllers. We can do either one, guys. And it is now the 2nd of January, 2023. I probably said 2022 at the beginning. I did that a couple of years ago. Anyway, look, I hope everyone enjoyed this, and we'll be getting together again soon, I hope. All right. Happy New Year, everyone.